Long before the spaceship and the glowing portals, the very first version of Rick and Morty was a crude little homemade cartoon from 2006 about a stuck kite, and almost nobody has ever seen it. That short is only the beginning. Hidden in the quiet corners of this show is a whole trail of forgotten things, a handful of tiny shorts that drifted away, hours of recordings no one outside the studio has ever heard, a sprawling game that slowly fell apart, a brutal minute buried inside another cartoon, beautiful versions made on the far side of the world, a foreign nightmare that crashed in with no warning, and, at the end of it all, the loss of the very voice that started everything. Over the next few hours, every one of these pieces gets gathered up, one by one, told slowly and softly, with nothing rushed and nothing left out. Welcome to Ricktopus. Let's get started. Before Rick, there was Doc. Long before Rick Sanchez ever stumbled drunk onto a television screen, before the spaceship and the green portals and the millions of people who could quote whole episodes from memory, there was a tiny, homemade cartoon that almost nobody saw. It came out in 2006. It was cheap, ugly, loud, and extremely rude. And hidden inside it were the first rough versions of the two characters who would one day take over a giant piece of the cartoon world. The cartoon was called The Real Animated Adventures of Doc and Marty. The person who made it was a young animator named Justin Roiland. In 2006, Roiland was a long way from being famous. He was one of many people making strange little cartoons and short films in their free time, hoping someone out there would watch. A lot of that early work went up through a small group called Channel 101. Channel 101 was a place where creators could bring short, homemade videos, show them in front of a crowd, and see how people reacted. One of the people who helped start Channel 101 was a writer named Dan Harmon. That name matters a great deal, because Harmon and Roiland would later build Rick and Morty side by side. Back in 2006, though, they were not a team. Roiland was simply a guy with a weird sense of humor and a computer. The way Doc and Marty came to exist is one of the stranger origin stories in all of cartoons, because the short was never really meant to be the start of anything. It began almost as a prank. Before this short, Roiland had made an earlier series of cartoons that made fun of the comedian Bill Cosby. Cosby's lawyers were not amused. They sent Roiland letters telling him to stop. Most people, when lawyers come knocking, get scared and quietly walk away. Roiland did the opposite. He decided to poke fun at the whole idea of getting those kinds of letters in the first place. So he made a cartoon that openly spoofed a famous movie, basically daring another big company to come after him, too. The movie he picked was Back to the Future. His plan, at first, was almost childish in how bold it was. He wanted to slap a long, fake title on the cartoon and pretend it was a real, official, brand new Back to the Future cartoon, just to annoy the giant company that actually owns Back to the Future. The whole point was to wave a flag and see who would charge at him. Over time, though, he started changing the plan. While he was putting the short together, he fell in love with the two voices he was doing. The grumpy old scientist and the nervous young kid started to feel like real characters instead of just a joke aimed at lawyers. So he backed off the prank a little. To stay out of serious trouble, he changed the names. The scientist became Doc Smith. The boy became Maharty McDonald's. Close enough to the movie to be funny, different enough to dodge a lawsuit. What he ended up with was short, scrappy, and unforgettable for anyone who tracks down the real thing. The story itself could not be simpler. Young Maharty is upset because his kite has gotten stuck in a tree. His friend Doc shows up and offers to help. Doc's solution is not a ladder, it is time travel. He tells Maharty they can just go back in time to the moment before the kite ever got stuck, which sounds clever for about 3 seconds. From there, the cartoon stops being about kites at all and turns into a wave of pure gross-out humor. Doc keeps telling Maharty to do something completely disgusting, again and again and again. It is the kind of rude, shocking joke that could never play on normal television. The whole short seems built to push every limit it can find and then push a little further. On the surface, that is all it is. A dumb, rude little spoof about a kite, a scientist, and a kid, full of jokes meant to make people gasp and laugh at the same time. Underneath that surface, something much bigger is going on, and it only becomes clear once a person already knows Rick and Morty. Listen to Doc and Marty for even 30 seconds and the truth jumps out. Roiland did both voices himself, and they are almost exactly the voices fans would later hear on Adult Swim. Doc talks fast and loud. He burps in the middle of his own sentences. He sounds like a smart, messy, impatient old man who has stopped caring what anyone thinks of him. Marty is the opposite. He is jumpy and whiny and scared, always a step behind, always being dragged into something he does not understand. The push and pull between a confident, careless adult and a frightened, gentle kid is right there in 2006, fully formed, years before the famous show show existed. The character designs are rougher and the animation is far cheaper, but the heart of the pairing is already beating. The animation deserves a closer look because it tells its own story. This was not made by a big studio with a big budget. It looks handmade because it was. The movements are stiff, the drawings are simple. The whole thing has the feel of a project put together by one person who cared more about the jokes and the voices than about making everything look polished. And in a strange way, that roughness is part of the charm. The energy carries it. The short even has a little opening tune, a tiny early hint of the kind of theme music the real show would later be known for. None of it is fancy. All of it points forward. The reason this short ended up mattering so much comes down to what happened next, and it happened slowly. For years, Doc and Marty was just one of many odd cartoons Roiland had made. He kept busy in those days, putting together short films and test cartoons for all sorts of places, not only Channel 101. Most creators make dozens of little things that go nowhere. This easily could have been one of them. A weird old video buried in the back of the internet, remembered by a handful of die-hard fans and no one else. For a long time, that is basically what it was. Then Dan Harmon came into the picture in a bigger way. Harmon had become well known for a television comedy called Community. When the chance came to make something new for Adult Swim, Harmon and Roiland teamed up. They needed an idea worth building a whole series around. Roiland suggested going back to those two characters from the old Channel 101 spoof, the loud scientist and the nervous boy. The dynamic was already proven. The voices already worked. They reshaped the idea, dropped the Back to the Future connection, gave the characters brand new names, and turned them into a grandfather and his grandson. Doc Smith became Rick Sanchez. Marty McDonald's became Morty Smith. The new show, Rick and Morty, first aired on Adult Swim on December 2nd, 2013. So the path runs in a straight, clear line. A rude little prank cartoon from 2006, made partly to annoy lawyers, grew up into one of the most popular adult cartoons in the world. The seed of a show watched by millions was a homemade spoof about a stuck kite and a long string of gross jokes. Which brings up the question of why this short belongs in a list of lost Rick and Morty media at all, since it has not vanished completely. The honest answer is that Doc and Marty sits in a strange and lonely place. It is, without any doubt, the single most important piece of Rick and Morty history. Everything came from it. At the same time, it is one of the least watched and least talked about pieces of that history. Most fans of the show have heard that some old Back to the Future spoof exists somewhere, but a much smaller number have actually sat down and watched the whole thing from start to finish. It hides in plain sight. It is famous for being the start of something huge and almost unknown as an actual cartoon. There is also a second layer to its strange status, and it has to do with how rude the original really is. Because the short is so crude, it has not always traveled around the internet in one clean piece. A gentler version exists, one that trims out some of the grossest, most shocking moments so it can be shared more easily. The full, raw, unfiltered original is harder to come across. So even with this short, there is a small mystery about which version a person is really watching. The polished copy that spreads around is not always the complete thing Roiland first put together. Pieces of the original have been quietly tucked away, smoothed over, or left out simply because they are too much for most places to host. That gap between the cleaned up copy most people stumble onto and the rough original underneath is exactly the kind of thing that makes a piece of media feel partly lost, even when it technically still exists. The short is out there. The whole short, in its true first form, is a little more slippery. Watching it now is a genuinely odd experience for anyone who loves the later show. Every weird beat feels like a memory of something that had not happened yet. The voice that would later say so many famous lines is right there, doing crude jokes about a kite. The nervous kid, who would later go on 1,000 adventures across endless worlds, is right there, getting bossed around in a backyard. The cartoon has no idea what it is about to become. It is a child standing next to a future it cannot see. There is something quietly powerful in that. A throwaway prank made by one person to laugh at the idea of being scared of lawyers accidentally held the blueprint for a series that would run for years, win awards, and shape the humor of a whole generation. None of the people involved planned it that way. The plan was just to be funny and a little reckless. The bigger thing grew out of that on its own. For a video about lost and forgotten corners of Rick and Morty, this is the natural place to begin, because it is the root the rest of the tree grows from. Before the science, before the sadness, before the deep stories about family and time and meaning, there was a loud old man, a scared boy, a stuck kite, and a string of jokes too rude for television. That is where it all started. Everything after it is, in some way, a much bigger and much more careful version of that first scrappy idea. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the short itself only tells part of the early story. Doc and Mahardy did not appear once and then disappear. Roiland brought those same two characters back more than once in those early days, in even smaller, even harder to find little videos that most fans have never laid eyes on. A few of them were barely cartoons at all. One of them was made to sell a drink. Section 2, The Other Three. The original Doc and Mahardy short was not the end of those two characters. It turned out to be the start of a small, scattered little run. In total, 4 Doc and Mahardy shorts were made. The first is the famous rude one already covered. The other 3 are far harder to find, far less talked about, and most people who love Rick and Morty have never seen a single second of any of them. These 3 live in the deepest, dustiest corner of the whole story. If the first short is a deep cut, these are the deep cuts inside the deep cut. They were never meant to last. They were quick little things, made fast, for very specific reasons, and then mostly left behind. Yet each one features the same loud old scientist and the same nervous boy, voiced again by Justin Roiland, doing their thing years before anyone outside a tiny circle had ever heard of them. To understand why these shorts exist at all, it helps to picture the little world they came from. Channel 101 was not a television channel in the normal sense. It was a do-it-yourself event, a place where people who made short videos could show their work to a real crowd and see how the room reacted. Creators would bring in tiny homemade pilots, the audience would respond, and the most popular ones earned the right to keep going. It was scrappy and friendly and a little bit wild, run on passion more than money. Dan Harmon, the man who would later help build Rick and Morty, was one of the people who started it. So this whole stage was already quietly connected to the future of the show, even back then. Channel 101 also had its own little awards, known as the Channy Awards. Think of it as the group handing out playful trophies to celebrate the best stuff its members had made. These award shows needed content. They needed funny clips, filler, jokes, and bits to keep the night moving. And when someone needed a reliable laugh, Roiland had 2 characters sitting right there, ready to go. So Doc and Marty got pulled back out of the drawer more than once, like a pair of trusty puppets that could be dropped into almost any situation. The first of these follow-up shorts was made to promote a comic book. The comic was called Scud, the Disposable Assassin. Rather than a normal cartoon adventure, this short played more like a video where the characters talk straight at the camera, almost the way a person might film themselves chatting to an audience online. The whole point was to get people interested in the comic. Roiland made it with a collaborator named Kelsey Abbott, who would also help on another of these shorts. So here are the proto-versions of Rick and Morty, being used not to tell their own story, but to sell someone else on reading a completely different thing. The characters had become useful. They were a tool now, a way to grab attention and make people smile while pointing them towards something else. That alone is a strange thought. The early shells of 2 characters who would one day carry an entire hit series first got reused as a kind of advertisement helper. Their job was to be funny enough that the joke would stick and the comic would get noticed in the process. It worked because the dynamic worked. A confident, careless older figure dragging along a jumpy younger one is funny in almost any setting, whether that setting is a backyard, a comic shop pitch, or a stage at a small awards night. The second of the 3 came out on December 3rd, 2006. This one was built around the idea of the creative freedom of Channel 101. In simple terms, it was a short where Doc and Marty returned to talk up the thing that made Channel 101 special, which was the freedom to make whatever weird, rude, personal stuff a creator wanted without a big company looking over their shoulder. It was put out under a little group name, Comic Sacrifice, which was the small label connected to these Doc and Marty shorts. So the characters were now playing a new role. They had become spokesmen in a way, standing up for the little community that gave them life. There is something fitting about that, since the original short was itself a celebration of doing whatever felt funny, no matter who might get annoyed. The characters were made in the spirit of total creative freedom, so it makes sense that they got handed the job of cheering that same freedom on. The third and final short went the furthest into the world of selling things. It was a Gatorade commercial. Not a real one, paid for by the drink company in the normal way, but a short made for the 2007 Channy Awards, which that year had Gatorade attached as a sponsor. Kelsey Abbott handled the animation on this one. So the 2 early characters, the rough drafts of Rick and Morty, ended up starring in a spoof drink ad for a small award show. A scientist and a frightened kid, first dreamed up to mess with movie studios and lawyers, were now part of a goofy commercial bit. The same energy that made the first short shocking got pointed at the silly idea of selling a sports drink. Lined up together, these 3 shorts paint a clear little picture of how Roiland used his best idea. Whenever there was a need, a comic to promote, a community to celebrate, an award show show to fill, those two characters came back out. They were flexible. They could be dropped into almost any task and still be entertaining. And that flexibility is a quiet sign of how strong the core idea really was. A weak pairing falls apart the moment it leaves its original story. A strong one keeps working no matter where it gets placed. Doc and Marty kept working. Roiland was busy in those years beyond just these shorts, too. He was making all sorts of odd cartoons and characters. Things with names like House of Cosby's and Mr. Sprinkles, throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what stuck. He was the kind of creator who produced a huge amount of strange material, most of which never grew into anything big. Out of that whole messy pile, it was the loud scientist and the nervous boy who kept coming back again and again. They were the idea he trusted. They were the ones he reached for when he needed something dependable. The reason all three of these belong in a list of lost and forgotten Rick and Morty media comes down to how thin the trail is. The original Rude short at least gets mentioned whenever people talk about where Rick and Morty came from. These three barely get mentioned at all. The records about them are short and scattered. Basic facts, like exactly what happens in each one second by second, are not easy to pin down with full confidence, because so little careful writing exists about them. They were made for one-time uses, shown to small crowds, and then mostly set aside. There was no reason at the time for anyone to treat them as important. Nobody knew the characters would become famous, so nobody carefully saved and labeled and protected every copy the way people would have if they had known what these two were going to turn into. That is exactly how media slips toward being lost. Not always through some dramatic event, but through plain, quiet neglect. Something gets made for a small purpose. The purpose passes, and the thing drifts. Years go by. The people who saw it move on, or forget. Copies get harder to find. And by the time the world circles back and decides the thing actually mattered, the full, clean, original versions can be tough to round up. These three shorts sit right in that gap. They are tied to one of the most successful adult cartoons ever made, and at the same time, they are close to invisible. There is also a sweet kind of innocence in them when looking back now. None of these shorts are trying to be deep. None of them carry the heavy themes the real show would later be praised for. They are just quick, rough, cheerful little jobs. Promote this comic, celebrate this community, sell this drink. Simple goals, handled with the same two voices that would one day be quoted by millions. There is no weight on them yet. The characters are loose and free and completely unaware that a giant future is waiting for them. Watching them now, knowing what comes next, gives even a silly fake drink ad a strange glow. These shorts also quietly prove an important point about the show that followed. The heart of Rick and Morty was never something that got invented in a big writer's room all at once. It was tested over and over in tiny, low-stakes places first. Every time Roiland reused these characters, he was sharpening the timing, the voices, and the back and forth between them. By the time the full series finally came along, the central pairing had already been carried through a handful of different little jobs and survived every one. It had been to a comic pitch, an award stage, and a joke commercial. It was battle-tested in the smallest possible ways. So the four early shorts, taken as a group, form the true root system of the whole thing. The first one planted the seed. The other three were small, almost accidental waterings that kept the idea alive during the years before the big break. Without that little run of obscure videos, the characters might have faded out completely, just another set of cartoons in a creator's overflowing drawer. Instead, they stayed in use, stayed sharp, and stayed ready. For anyone hunting down every forgotten piece of Rick and Morty history, these three are among the hardest to fully see and among the easiest to overlook. They rarely show up in the big conversations. They get skipped, even by people who think they know the origin story well. The famous Rude short hogs all the attention, while its three quieter siblings sit off to the side, mostly unwatched. That imbalance is its own small tragedy, because the three follow-ups are where the proof really lives. They show the idea being trusted, reused, and relied on, which says far more about its strength than a single one-time prank ever could. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The early era closes there, with a scientist and a boy who had been a comic salesman, a community cheerleader, and a sports drink pitchman, all before they ever had their real names. After this stretch, the long, quiet years passed, and then everything changed. The two characters finally got their own full television series, with real money, real animators, and a real recording booth behind them. And the way that show got put together, especially the way the lines were actually performed, ended up creating something almost no one expected. Hours upon hours of material were recorded on purpose and then never shared with anyone, sitting sitting somewhere out of reach to this very day. Section 3. The Hours No One Heard. The long, quiet years finally ended when the two characters got their real chance. After all the tiny homemade shorts, the comic promos, and the joke commercials, the loud scientist and the nervous boy were rebuilt into a proper television series with a real budget behind it. They got new names, a full family, a whole universe to explore, and a team of artists and writers working to bring it all to life. Rick and Morty arrived on Adult Swim at the end of 2013, and the show took off in a way almost no one had predicted. The same dynamic that had been kicking around small screenings for years was suddenly being watched by huge crowds. With a real show came a real way of making it, and one part of that process ended up creating one of the strangest piles of hidden material in the entire history of the series. It came from a special type of episode, the kind built around something the show called interdimensional cable. The idea behind interdimensional cable is simple and very funny. Rick has a device that lets the family watch television from every other dimension at once. So instead of normal channels, the screen fills with bizarre shows, fake adverts, weird movie trailers, and strange little programs from countless other versions of reality. The family sits on the couch and flips through this endless flood of nonsense, and the episode becomes a parade of quick, random, hilarious clips. 2 episodes leaned fully into this idea. The first was in the show's opening season, an episode called Rixty Minutes. The second came a season later, called Interdimensional Cable 2, Tempting Fate. Both are stuffed with tiny made-up shows and commercials, one after another, each one only lasting a few moments before flipping to the next. The way these clips got made is where the lost material comes from, and it sets these episodes apart from almost everything else on television. Most cartoons are written down word for word long before anyone records the voices. A script is created, lines are locked in, and the actors read those exact lines. The interdimensional cable bits worked in a much looser way. Instead of carefully writing every joke first, Roiland and members of the team would sit in the recording room and simply make things up on the spot. They would toss ideas back and forth, riff on each other, chase random thoughts, and see what came out. This making it up as they go approach is called improvising, and the show used it heavily for these segments. These sessions were not short. Roiland has said that the recording would stretch on for around 4 or 5 hours at a time, with everyone trading pitches, building on each other, and rolling from one strange idea into the next. Hours of talking, joking, and goofing around, all of it being captured. And then, out of all those hours, only the very best little moments were chosen to actually appear in the finished episode. That last part is the whole reason this belongs in any list of lost Rick and Morty material. Each cable episode only holds a few minutes of these clips. The recording behind them ran for hours. So for every short bit that made it onto the screen, there was a mountain of other material that got left out. Jokes that did not quite land. Ideas that ran too long. Strange tangents that wandered nowhere. Alternate versions of bits that were funny but lost out to something funnier. All of that got recorded on purpose, listened to, judged, and then quietly set aside. The public has never heard the vast majority of it. The show was even cheeky about its own secret. In the first cable episode, Rick makes a passing comment about how the channels have a made-up-on-the-spot kind of feel to them. It was a sly little wink, a way of telling sharp viewers that what they were watching really had been improvised, without spelling it out directly. The clue was right there in plain sight, hidden inside the joke itself. The bits that survived and made it to air became some of the most quoted and beloved moments in the whole series. There is the fake nature documentary about a creature, the absurd How It's Made segment explaining how a useless household object gets built, the strange parody of a famous comic strip cat, the salesman with one very specific and very pointless product, and many more. Each of these started as something pulled out of thin air during one of those long sessions. They feel loose and odd and alive, precisely because they were not planned out in advance. The looseness is the flavor. The fact that anything coherent came out of hours of rambling is part of the magic. It helps to picture what those rooms must have been like. A small group of people, a microphone, and the freedom to say absolutely anything. No rule about staying on topic, no worry about making sense. Just permission to be as weird as possible for hours on end. Roiland has openly admitted that he would drink during these sessions, which is part of why so many of the surviving clips include laughing, stumbling over words, and characters breaking and giggling in the middle of a bit. That loose, slightly messy energy is baked right into the final product. The cracks were left in on purpose because the cracks were funny. After the talking was done, a second group had a wild job on their hands. The artists who actually draw the cartoon had to take whatever strange thing got improvised and turn it into moving pictures. If Roiland rambled about some bizarre creature or some impossible scene, someone then had to figure out how to draw it. Sometimes he would tell the artists roughly what needed to happen on screen. Other times, he would simply hand them the audio and let them invent the visuals however they wanted. So the final clips are a strange team effort where one person's drunken late-night idea becomes another person's drawing challenge. And the gap between those two steps is where a lot of the surreal charm comes from. Improvising was not only a cable episode thing either. That loose spirit showed up across the early show in small ways. The famous catchphrase the main character is known for, the one fans chant and put on shirts and quote endlessly, was originally just something Roiland blurted out in the booth without a plan. It was made up in the moment, exactly like the cable clips. The show later went back and gave that random phrase a deeper, sadder meaning. But at birth, it was pure nonsense that happened to stick. There is also a small moment in an early episode where two characters goof off and toss objects at each other, which Roiland has pointed to as another bit he simply improvised. These little flecks of unplanned material are scattered through the early seasons like tiny fingerprints. All of that raises a quiet, fascinating question that can never really be answered from the outside. If the finished clips that made it to air are this good, what did the cut material sound like? Somewhere in the making of those episodes, hours of a wildly creative person riffing freely were captured. Most of it never reached anyone's ears beyond the few people in the room. Some of it was surely too rough, too long, too strange, or just not good enough to use. But some of it must have been genuinely funny, and simply lost a coin flip against an even funnier bit. Those near misses, those almost clips, exist as recordings that were made and then shelved. This is a very pure form of lost media, and it is different from the old shorts covered earlier. The early shorts were finished things that drifted into obscurity because nobody bothered to save them carefully. This cut material is the opposite kind of loss. It was never meant to be seen in the first place. It was raw, unfinished, working material, the messy middle step between an empty page and a polished episode. Studios almost never release that kind of thing because it is not designed to be a product. It is closer to a sketchbook full of scribbles than a finished painting. The world only ever gets the cleaned up final version, while the sprawling, rambling source sits out of reach. There is a strong pull for fans in the thought of those hours. People who loved the show would happily sit through 4 or 5 hours of unfiltered, unplanned riffing, even the parts that flop, just to feel like they were in the room. That kind of behind-the-curtain material has a special magic because it shows the mind at work before the editing tidies everything up. It would reveal how the jokes were actually born, which ideas got chased and dropped, and how a throwaway line might slowly turn into something the whole bit hangs on. The finished episodes only show the trophies. The raw recordings would show the entire hunt. Yet that is almost certainly material the public will never get. There is no real reason for it to be released. It was a tool, used and then no longer needed once the good parts were pulled out. Sharing the full sessions would mean handing over something unpolished and private, full of dead ends and mistakes, recorded by people who assumed only the best slivers would ever leave the room, so it stays hidden. Not destroyed, not lost in a fire, just permanently parked somewhere the world cannot reach. Out of sight, gathering dust, existing only as a fact and a rumor rather than something anyone can actually watch. That makes these cable episodes a strange double thing. On one hand, they are some of the most rewatched and quoted episodes the series ever produced, beloved by huge numbers of fans. On the other hand, they are the visible tip of a buried iceberg, the small, bright surface of a much larger pool of recordings that nobody outside the studio has ever heard. Every time someone laughs at one of those famous clips, they are enjoying the survivor of a long, messy contest, the single bit that beat out hours of rivals to earn a place on screen. The deeper lesson sitting inside all of this is about how the show truly got made. Rick and Morty often gets praise for being clever and carefully built, full of deep ideas and tight planning. And a lot of it is exactly that, but a real important slice of its soul came from the opposite place. From a loose room where a slightly tipsy creator was allowed to say anything at all and trust that the funny bits would float to the top. The control and the chaos lived side by side. The polished show that millions admire was partly grown out of pure, unscripted mess, and most of that mess never made it out into the light. So the hours roll on somewhere, unheard. Hundreds of jokes that never aired. Dozens of voices and characters that flickered to life for a moment and then got cut before a single drawing was ever made of them. A whole shadow version of these episodes, recorded and then sealed away. It is one of the largest hidden things connected to the series, and one of the least likely to ever surface, precisely because it was working material that was never built for an audience. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one shining exception to all of this, though, and it is a strange and wonderful one. The show almost always keeps its improvising locked behind closed doors, hidden inside the recording room where only the team can hear it. But on one rare occasion, the very same kind of make-it-up-on-the-spot magic happened completely out in the open, in front of cameras, with an audience watching every second. No booth, no animation, no editing to hide the rough edges. An entire tiny episode was invented live, right there, on a stage, and it ended up slipping out into the world in a quiet corner of the internet that almost no fan ever thinks to check. Section 4. The one that got out. Almost all of the show's made-up-on-the-spot magic stays buried inside the recording room, locked away where only the team can hear it. The hours of riffing, the wild tangents, the jokes that never make the cut, all of it happens behind closed doors and stays there. There is, however, one shining moment where that same exact magic happened out in the open, with cameras rolling and nothing hidden. A whole little episode of Rick and Morty got invented from nothing, right in front of everyone, and then it drifted off into a forgotten corner of the internet where barely anyone ever finds it. The setting was San Diego Comic-Con, the giant yearly gathering where fans of comics, cartoons, movies, and games all pack into one massive building to celebrate the things they love. It is one of the biggest events of its kind in the world. Creators show up, panels are held, news gets announced, and fans line up for hours to get close to their favorite shows. In the summer of 2016, Rick and Morty was one of the hottest tickets there, and for a painful reason. The show was stuck in a long, frustrating wait between its second season and its third. Fans were starving for new episodes. The gap kept stretching on with no clear end, and the hunger in the fan base was enormous. During that convention, a team from a magazine called New York Magazine, working through its entertainment side known as Vulture, got the show's core people together for something special. They gathered co-creator Dan Harmon, co-creator and lead voice Justin Roiland, writer Ryan Ridley, and Spencer Grammer, who voices Summer on the show. 4 key people, all in one place, all part of the machine that builds the series. And then the magazine handed them a simple, almost silly challenge. Make up a brand new Rick and Morty story, right here, right now, on the spot, with nothing prepared. So they did. With no script, no plan, and no animation behind them, the 4 of them built a tiny episode out of thin air while the cameras captured every second. The story they invented is exactly the kind of thing the real show might cook up, which is the whole point. Harmon took the lead, setting up a simple starting idea and acting as a sort of narrator who pushed the tale forward. The plot began with Summer wanting to get into college, specifically a very famous and fancy one, and hoping Rick would help her get there. Rick, though, was far too busy to deal with college applications because he was occupied with something deeply gross. He was busy fusing poop into Morty's legs, somewhere below the knees, in some bizarre experiment that made no sense and needed no explanation. And in classic Morty fashion, Morty was completely fine with it. He had no problem at all with the disgusting thing being done to him. From that strange starting point, the made-up story tumbled forward fast. Before long, Summer had graduated with honors, sailing through her education in a blink, and Morty, meanwhile, had been reduced to something almost unimaginable. He had become a tiny, living eyelash, a single sentient hair, floating helplessly and about to be blown away into nothingness by an alien invader. In just a few minutes, the 4 of them had taken a kid wanting to go to college and twisted it into poop-filled legs, a rushed graduation, and a boy turned into a doomed, floating eyelash facing the end of his existence. The leap from a normal teenage wish to total cosmic horror, with a heavy dose of gross-out humor in the middle, is about as perfect a summary of the show's flavor as anything could be. Watching the 4 of them build this is where the real treasure lies. Roiland did both the Rick voice and the Morty voice live, flipping between the loud, careless old man and the nervous, shaky boy without missing a beat. For longtime fans, seeing him switch back and forth in real time with no editing to clean it up is a rare and impressive thing. The 2 voices that usually get recorded separately and stitched together were suddenly bouncing off each other live, performed by one person on the spot. Harmon shaped the bones of the story and kept it moving, showing how much of his job is really about steering chaos into something that holds together. Grammer and Ridley jumped in and added to it, and the whole group fed off each other, each new idea sparking the next. What makes this little clip so valuable is that it is basically the secret process from the recording room performed in broad daylight. The hidden way the show actually gets made, the loose riffing and the building on each other's wild ideas, normally stays sealed away. This time, that very same way of working was put on full display, captured by cameras, and offered up for anyone to watch. It is like getting to peek behind a curtain that is almost always kept tightly shut. The exact engine that powers so much of the series, usually invisible, was running right there in the open. It also also quietly explained something fans were desperate to understand at the time, which was why on Earth the third season was taking so long. Around that same convention, Harmon spoke about the painful slowness of making the show, and a big part of the reason came down to this very approach. Because so much of the dialogue gets improvised over a loose story plan rather than a tight, locked script, the process is unpredictable and often slow. He talked about how the team would build a rough early version of an episode, look at it, and decide it was not good enough, then go back and redo it, even when they were already behind. The same freewheeling style that produced so many beloved moments was also a major cause of the long, agonizing delays. So this little improvised clip was almost a live demonstration of the exact thing that kept fans waiting. The looseness was the gift and the curse at once. The truly strange part of this whole thing is where it ended up living, and that is what tips it into the territory of forgotten and overlooked media. This improvised episode was not posted on the show's own channels. It did not go up where the regular fan base gathers and watches. Instead, it landed on the magazine's own video channel, tucked in among interviews and entertainment clips that have nothing to do with cartoons. For a fan looking for Rick and Morty content, that is close to the last place anyone would ever think to check. The show's actual home is one place. A magazine's general video page is somewhere else entirely. So this gem sits in a spot completely separate from where its audience naturally looks. That mismatch is exactly how a real, official, genuinely interesting piece of media becomes nearly invisible without ever truly disappearing. It is not hidden by lawyers. It is not locked in a vault. It is sitting right out in public, fully available. Yet, because it lives in an unexpected corner, attached to a magazine rather than the show, the huge majority of fans have simply never stumbled across it. It gets buried under everything else, drowned out, easy to scroll right past. A person could be a massive fan of the series, know every episode by heart, and still have no idea this little improvised story exists at all. There is something almost gentle about that kind of being lost. The clip is not gone. It is just quietly waiting in a place nobody walks past. It depends entirely on someone happening to find it, or someone pointing it out. Left alone, it simply fades into the background noise of the internet, a small treasure with no signpost leading to it. The clip also carries a deeper value for anyone trying to understand the show, because it strips everything else away. There is no fancy animation to dazzle the eye. There is no sound design, no music, no editing tricks. All of that is gone, leaving only the raw building blocks. Just a few quick minds and their voices, making something out of nothing in real time. With all the polish removed, the true source of the show's spirit stands fully exposed. The genius, if it can be called that, lives in the speed and the chemistry of the people, not in the shine added later. And that comes through with total clarity in this stripped-down clip. The funny part was funny before a single drawing existed. It is worth sitting with how impressive the speed really is. Building a story on the spot, in front of cameras, with no chance to think it over or try again, is genuinely hard. Most people freeze up. The four of them instead spun out a complete little arc with a beginning, a middle, a wild escalation, and a doomed ending, all in a handful of minutes. The fact that it sounds so much like a real Rick and Morty premise, even though it was pure improvising, proves how deeply the team understood the world they had built. The voices, the cruelty mixed with comedy, the way a small human wish spirals into something cosmic and dark, all of it poured out naturally. The formula was so locked into their bones that they could produce it instantly, without effort, like a reflex. This connects straight back to the buried recordings from the cable episodes. That hidden material and this open clip are two halves of the same coin. One is the same kind of improvising kept secret, sealed away forever. The other is that improvising shown openly, captured and posted, yet still somehow overlooked. Together, they tell a clear story about how Rick and Morty really works. A huge part of its life force comes from a few people in a room making things up, trusting that the good bits will rise to the surface. Most of that process is invisible to the world. This one clip is the rare, precious exception. The moment the invisible became visible, even if almost nobody noticed. For anyone collecting every forgotten scrap of the series, this improvised episode is a perfect example of a strange truth. Lost media is not always destroyed media. Sometimes a thing can be fully alive, fully available, sitting right there for anyone to enjoy, and still be lost in every way that matters, simply because it ended up in the wrong neighborhood of the internet. The show's hidden creative heart was caught on camera and offered freely, then left to gather dust in a place its own fans rarely visit. It is a window into the magic, propped wide open, that most people walk straight past without ever glancing through. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Around this same stretch of years, the show tried something far bolder than a quick interview clip, something no cartoon had ever attempted before. It built a sprawling little world that fans could actually climb through with their own hands, tapping their way from one strange place to the next, hunting for hidden surprises buried inside. For a while, this odd playground worked beautifully and pulled in huge crowds. Then, slowly and quietly, it began to fall apart, piece by piece, until the giant interactive maze that once delighted so many became something almost no one can fully step into anymore. Section 5. The Maze That Fell Apart. In the year 2015, Rick and Morty was riding high. The first season had won people over, the fan base was growing fast, and excitement for the second season was huge. To feed that excitement, the team behind the show decided to try something that had never been done before by any cartoon, or really by anyone at all. They built a giant explorable world that fans could climb through with their own fingers, hidden inside a photo sharing app. They called it the Rickstaverse, and for a while, it was one of the most creative and ambitious things ever attached to the series. To understand what it was, it helps to picture the app it lived inside. Instagram is a place where people post pictures. Anyone can scroll through photos, tap on them, and follow different accounts. One of the features of the app lets a person tag things inside a photo, the way someone might point at a spot in a picture and stick a little label on it. Most people use that feature in simple ways, to mark a friend or a place. The makers of the Rickstaverse looked at that ordinary little tool and saw something else entirely. They saw doors. Here is how the strange machine worked. Each picture in the Rickstaverse was like a room. When a fan tapped on a photo, hidden tags would appear, and each tag acted like a doorway that warped the person off to a whole new picture somewhere else, often on a completely different account. Tap a spot, get sent flying to a new location. Tap again, jump somewhere new. By following these hidden tags from photo to photo, a fan could travel through an enormous connected world made entirely out of still images, all stitched together inside the app. It was the very first game ever built on Instagram, a true first of its kind. The show did not make this alone. The team worked with a company called Carrot Creative to design the whole thing, and brought in artists to draw the mini worlds. One of the freelance illustrators who helped said he drew more than 10 of the worlds himself, and that they ended up being seen by millions of fans. So a real crew of people poured serious effort into building this hidden playground, treating it not as a throwaway promo, but as a genuine creation. The scale of it, even at the start, was impressive. When it first launched alongside the second season, the Rickstaverse held around 25 different levels to explore. It contained 11 different planets, with 8 ready at the start and 3 more set to be revealed as the new season aired. The whole thing was spread across more than 80 separate Instagram accounts, all linked together by those hidden tags. Every image and clip was made in crisp, high quality, and it was packed with goodies. Hidden inside the maze were little comics, clips from the show, tiny games to play, collectible items to find, and Easter eggs tucked into corners, including content connected to the brand new season. It rewarded curiosity. The more a fan poked around, the more secret treasures they uncovered, and it kept growing. Over time, the Rickstaverse expanded until it sprawled across roughly 120 separate accounts and well over 1,800 individual picture squares. That is a staggering amount of connected pieces for what started as a promotion tool. New chapters were added on top of the original. One expansion arrived with the second season's final episode and built levels based on that finale. Another big addition came in the summer of 2016, themed around the show's beloved cable episodes. That one brought 20 new levels, a batch of comics starring the show's parody of a famous comic strip cat, and even a full little game set inside a factory that builds the show's silly, useless household object. The maze just kept getting bigger and richer, layering new worlds onto the old ones. What the Rickstaverse pulled off was genuinely groundbreaking, and the proof of that is hard to argue with. The whole creation grew so large and drew so much attention that the app itself had to change its own rules to allow this kind of sprawling, multi-account game to exist on it in the first place. A cartoon promotion got so clever and so popular that a major app rewrote part of how it operated to make room for it. Millions of fans wandered through it. For a stretch of time, it stood as a shining example of a show treating its fans to something they could actually touch and play, rather than just sit back and watch. Part of what made it special was that it held things a fan could not easily get anywhere else, at least not at the time. Some of the clips buried inside the maze were early peeks and exclusive bits, little rewards for the people willing to dig. Comics that lived nowhere else sat hidden in its corners. So the Rickstaverse was not only a fun toy, it was a place that contained pieces of the show's world, available only to those who explored it. To fully experience everything inside, a person had to actually go in and travel the maze by hand. That very design, the thing that made it so clever, is also exactly what doomed it. And this is where the Rickstaverse turns into one of the most fragile kinds of lost media there is. A normal video can be saved. It can be copied, downloaded, and kept as a single neat file that works the same way 10 years later as it did on day one. The Rickstaverse could never be saved like that because it was never a single file. It was a living web of connections, a sprawling chain of accounts and pictures and hidden tags that only worked as long as every link in the chain kept holding. The whole experience depended on tapping from one photo to another, warping across dozens upon dozens of separate accounts, all of it relying on features of an app owned by someone else entirely. The show did not control that app, it only borrowed space on it. That kind of borrowed home is shaky ground. An app like Instagram changes constantly. Features get added, removed, and reworked. The way photos behave, the way tags function, the way accounts connect, all of it shifts over the years as the company that owns the app makes its own choices. A creation built on top of all those moving parts is only as stable as the parts beneath it. The moment the platform changes how a feature works, or an account goes quiet, or a link in the chain stops connecting, the path through the maze can break. And a maze with broken paths is no longer a maze a person can fully walk through. So the very thing that made the Rickstaverse a marvel, its enormous web of linked accounts and clever use of a popular app, is the thing that made it impossible to keep alive in its full form. Time passed, the app evolved, the hype faded after the season it was built to promote, and a creation that once sprawled brilliantly across more than 100 accounts became something far harder to travel. The full journey, the way it was meant to be taken back when it was new and shiny, is something almost no one can experience anymore. Even pinning down its exact condition today is murky and uncertain, which is its own kind of haunting. A thing that millions once explored has drifted into a fog, neither clearly alive nor clearly gone. This is a very different flavor of lost media than the ones that came before. The old homemade shorts faded because nobody carefully saved them. The hidden recordings stayed buried because they were never meant for release. The improvised clip slipped away because it landed in an odd corner of the internet. The Rickstaverse decayed for a reason all its own. It fell apart because it was built on living, shifting ground that never stops changing. It is the kind of media that rots not from neglect and not from secrecy, but from depending on a system that keeps moving while the creation stays still. A sandcastle built at the edge of the tide was always going to face the water. There is something quietly sad in that, because the Rickstaverse was so ambitious and so full of heart. A cartoon looked at a simple photo app and decided to build an entire interactive universe inside it, packed with hand-drawn worlds, secret comics, little games, and hidden treasures, just to delight its fans. People worked hard on it. Artists drew worlds that millions of eyes would pass through. It pushed an app to change its own rules. By almost any measure, it was a triumph. And yet that very triumph carried its ending inside it from the start. The more daring and clever the format, the harder it becomes to keep that format alive once the world moves on. The strangest part is how complete it once was, compared to how scattered it is now. At its peak, a fan could spend hours warping from planet to planet, uncovering comic after comic, stumbling into little games, collecting hidden items, and feeling like they were truly wandering through the show's universe with their own hands. Every corner held something. The whole thing rewarded patience and curiosity. To go from that, a rich and full and living playground enjoyed by huge crowds, to a faded and broken thing that few can properly enter, is a real loss. Not a loud, dramatic loss, but a slow fading, like a path through a forest growing over a little more each year until it can barely be followed at all. For anyone trying to gather up every piece of forgotten Rick and Morty history, the Rickstaverse stands as a warning about a certain kind of creation. Some media is built to last, like a video sitting safely on a shelf. Other media is built to live, breathing only as long as the systems around it keep breathing too. The Rickstaverse belonged firmly to that second kind. It was alive while it was tended, and while the ground beneath it held steady. Once the attention moved elsewhere, and the app kept changing, it began to wither. What survives now is mostly the memory of it, the records describing how grand it once was, rather than the grand thing itself. It also marks a fascinating moment in the show's history, a time when the people behind it were willing to take wild swings far outside the normal cartoon box. They were not content to just make episodes. They wanted to build worlds in unexpected places, to surprise fans, to do things that had never been tried. That bold, experimental spirit produced something genuinely new. The cruel twist is that the boldest experiments are often the most fragile, because they reach beyond the safe and the simple into formats that nobody knows how to preserve. The safest media is boring and lasting. The most exciting media is daring and breakthrough. unbreakable. The Rickstaverse chose daring and paid the usual price for it. So it sits there now, a giant, crumbling maze made of pictures and tags, scattered across an app that has long since changed around it. Once a sprawling playground that millions roamed, now a faded puzzle that almost no one can fully solve. A bright, ambitious experiment that shone for a season and then slowly came undone. Brought low not by any villain, but by the simple, steady passing of time and the restless changing of the ground it stood on. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Around this same stretch, the two characters made a quick and brutal visit to one of the most famous cartoon families in the entire world. They came crashing in out of nowhere, wiped that whole family out in a matter of seconds, and then made a clumsy attempt to bring them back. All of it happening inside a show that was not even their own. The whole thing lasted less than a minute and sat tucked at the very start of someone else's episode, which makes it one of the easiest little gems in this entire story to miss completely. Section 6. Crashing the Couch. Sitting at the very start of an episode of a completely different show, lasting less than a minute, is one of the most overlooked pieces in this whole story. It is a real, official Rick and Morty moment, made in part by the show's own creators, and almost no fan ever thinks to count it. It is buried inside the longest-running cartoon family on the planet. That family is The Simpsons. Almost everyone on Earth knows them at least a little. The yellow skin, the spiky-haired boy, the baby with the pacifier, the dad who loves donuts. The Simpsons has been on television for an astonishing number of years, far longer than most shows ever dream of lasting. It is one of the most famous cartoons in human history, and its characters are recognized in nearly every corner of the world. The Simpsons has a small tradition that fans adore, and it is the key to understanding this hidden gem. At the very beginning of most episodes, there is a short little joke where the whole family rushes home and runs to sit on their couch. Each time, something different and funny happens when they get there. Sometimes the couch does something strange. Sometimes the family does. These little opening bits change from episode to episode, and over the years, they have become a beloved part of the show. Sometimes The Simpsons even invite guest artists from other shows to take over one of these openings and put their own spin on it. So this slot, the cozy little couch moment at the top of the episode, has a history of being handed over to outsiders for something special. In 2015, that special slot got handed to Rick and Morty. On the 17th of May that year, on the final episode of one of the Simpsons seasons, the famous couch opening was given over to the two interdimensional travelers, and what they did with it is one of the darkest, funniest little crossovers the show ever took part in. The most important thing to know is that this was the real deal, not some imitation cooked up by Simpsons writers alone. Dan Harmon, the co-creator of Rick and Morty, wrote the first version of this couch sequence himself. Justin Roiland then did rewrites on it and voiced both Rick and Morty for the bit, just as he did on the actual series. So the people who built Rick and Morty truly made this. It carries the genuine voices and the genuine creative hands behind the show. That is what makes it count as a real piece of Rick and Morty media, even though it lives inside someone else's program. The bit itself plays out fast and brutal. It opens the way a Simpsons episode normally does, with the family rushing in and getting ready to settle onto their couch, perfectly cozy and familiar. Then, out of nowhere, Rick and Morty's flying ship comes smashing straight through the wall. The entire Simpson family gets splattered on impact, every single one of them flattened into yellow smears across the room. Even the baby is wiped out. In a couple of seconds, one of the most famous families in entertainment is reduced to colorful streaks on the floor. Rick and Morty climb out of the wrecked ship, instantly panicking over the horror they have just caused. And here the bit becomes pure Rick and Morty, because the way the two of them react tells anyone who watches exactly who these characters are. Rick immediately tries to dump all the blame onto Morty, while poor Morty runs around in a frenzy of guilt, completely overwhelmed by what just happened. Then Rick, in his cold and practical way, scoops up the smeared remains of the family into a little tube and hands it over to Morty, along with the family's framed portrait, as if cleaning up a spill. From there, the two of them take the leftover bits of the family on a trip to bring them back to life. They pass through a strange alien place where body parts and living material are grown and gathered, and Rick uses it to try to rebuild the Simpsons from their remains. The plan works in the sense that the family does come back. The problem is that they come back horribly wrong. Instead of the normal yellow family, the rebuilt Simpsons return as grotesque, twisted creatures, a nightmarish mix of Simpson, Rick, and alien all fused together. They are alive again, but in a form that is deeply disturbing to look at. Rick takes all of this in stride, the way only he could. He casually notes that cleaning the little tubes holding the family's leftover material with his own spit was probably a mistake, treating a monstrous failure like a minor kitchen slip-up. Then, without much concern at all, he announces that he is driving this time, and the two of them simply leave. The horror they created is left behind without a second second thought. The whole thing ends with that signature careless shrug that defines so much of who Rick is. The way it looks adds to the strangeness. A different team of artists handled this opening, so the animation has a slightly smoother, slightly different feel from the usual Simpsons style. Tucked into the scene are little hidden nods to another famous cartoon made by the same creator who made The Simpsons, including a vending machine for a fictional drink, a familiar delivery ship, and a small brain-shaped creature. These tiny details reward sharp eyes and connect a web of beloved cartoons together in the background. And at the very end of the full episode, one of the Simpsons characters even makes a joke complaining about guest animators, a cheeky little wink at the fact that outsiders had taken over the opening. What makes this crossover so brilliant is the clash between the two shows, and how perfectly each one stays true to itself. The Simpsons opening is, by tradition, warm and safe and familiar, the comfortable start to a family comedy that has aired for decades. Rick and Morty came barreling into that cozy little moment and filled it with sudden death, panic, guilt, body horror, and cold cruelty, all in under a minute. The gentle ritual of the family reaching their couch got hijacked and turned into a grim, gruesome disaster. That contrast is the entire joke. Two very different worlds collided, and the collision itself was the punchline. Look closer, and the bit is doing something clever about both shows at once. By letting their iconic family get gruesomely wiped out and rebuilt into monsters, The Simpsons showed a willingness to laugh at themselves and let another show run wild in their house. And by bringing death, blame, horrible consequences, and a careless cleanup, Rick and Morty showed exactly what kind of show it is. Everything that makes the series what it is got packed into less than 60 seconds. Rick blaming Morty, Morty drowning in guilt, a reckless experiment going terribly wrong, a monstrous result waved off as no big deal, a grandfather who treats a catastrophe like a spilled drink. In a tiny burst, the whole personality of the show was captured. A viewer who had never seen a single full episode could watch this little opening and walk away understanding the heart of Rick and Morty. Now comes the part that lands this in a story about lost and forgotten media, because the gag is not lost in the usual sense at all. It aired on national television on one of the most watched shows in the world, seen by millions of people on the night it played. It can still be found floating around online today. By the normal meaning of the word, it is not lost in the slightest. The loss is of a quieter kind, the same sort that swallowed the improvised clip earlier. This is an official Rick and Morty appearance that almost no Rick and Morty fan ever thinks about, simply because of where it lives. It is not part of any Rick and Morty episode. It does not appear anywhere in the show's own list of episodes. It is not sitting in the show's collection on any streaming service, waiting next to the regular installments. It exists only as the opening seconds of an episode of a totally different cartoon. To find it, a person has to know it is there and go looking inside The Simpsons, which is the last place a Rick and Morty fan would naturally search, so it slips through the cracks of memory with ease. A fan could love Rick and Morty deeply, know every line of every real episode, and have absolutely no idea that the show's own creators once made a genuine little Rick and Morty bit and hit it at the start of a Simpsons finale. It does not show up when someone lists their favorite Rick and Morty moments because it does not feel like it belongs to the show. It belongs to The Simpsons by location, even though it belongs to Rick and Morty by blood. That split is exactly what makes it so easy to forget. There is a real charm in pieces like this, the official treasures that hide inside other people's houses. They are not buried because anyone wanted to bury them. They are buried by the simple fact of where they were placed. A crossover always sits in two worlds at once, and that means it can fall into the gap between them. The fans of one show forget it because it played on another show. The fans of the other show barely register it as anything more than a fun, one-time opening. Caught in the middle, the bit quietly fades from both crowds at once, remembered fully by neither. That is what makes stumbling onto it such a delight. Discovering this couch crossover feels like finding a little gift left in a room a person never expected to enter. There is the surprise of realizing it is genuinely real, genuinely made by the right people, with the right voices, and not some cheap copy. There is the joy of seeing the two shows smashed together so perfectly, and there is the strange thrill of knowing that something this fun and this on-brand has been sitting in plain sight for years, watched once by millions, and then slowly forgotten by nearly everyone who loved the show it actually came from. It also stands as proof of just how big Rick and Morty had become by that point. The Simpsons does not hand its precious couch opening to just anyone. For that long-running giant to invite the two characters in, to let them crash through the wall and turn the family into smears, meant Rick and Morty Morty had grown into something major, a show worthy of crossing over with one of the most famous cartoons ever made. The little gag is a quiet marker of the series rising into the big leagues, a sign that it had earned a place beside the legends, even if the moment itself ended up mostly forgotten. So it sits there still, a perfect, brutal, hilarious minute of true Rick and Morty, tucked at the front of an episode of a show it does not belong to. Made by the right hands, voiced by the right person, carrying the full spirit of the series in a single, quick burst. Seen by a huge crowd on one night long ago, and then quietly left behind, remembered by almost no one as the genuine piece of the show that it truly is. A real gem, hidden not by secrecy or neglect, but simply by living in the wrong house. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A few years after this brief and bloody visit to another show's living room, the series pulled a strange stunt of its very own, on the one day of the year built for tricks and lies. Rather than handing fans the new episodes they were begging for, the show served up something else entirely. It was a twisted, ugly, deeply unsettling version of Rick and Morty that came from another country altogether, starring warped copies of the two characters under different names. It appeared with no warning at all, looked nothing like the real show, and left a great many viewers feeling genuinely disturbed by what they had just watched. Section 7. The Nightmare from Down Under. The first day of April is known around the world as a day for jokes, pranks, and harmless lies. People play tricks on each other, fake stories spread for fun, and nobody is supposed to take anything too seriously. The network that airs Rick and Morty, Adult Swim, has long loved this tradition. Over the years, it has pulled all sorts of stunts on that day, and one year, it used April Fools to hand fans something so strange and so unsettling that many of them are still not quite sure how to feel about it. The trick worked so well, partly because of what had happened the year before. On the 1st of April in 2017, Adult Swim had pulled off a wonderful surprise. With no warning at all, it suddenly aired the long-awaited premiere of the show's third season, dropping a real new episode out of nowhere on a day when no one expected it. Fans went wild. It was a beautiful gift, a genuine treat disguised as a prank. That moment taught the fan base a powerful lesson. The 1st of April, in the world of Rick and Morty, might mean something amazing was coming. So when the 1st of April rolled around again in 2018, hopes were sky high. The fans were desperate. New episodes were taking forever, tangled up in business problems behind the scenes that left everyone stuck waiting with no clear answer. The hunger for fresh Rick and Morty was enormous, and after the gift of the year before, people naturally wondered if lightning might strike twice, if another surprise episode might suddenly appear. The schedule that night listed only a rerun of an old episode, a repeat of something fans had already seen. But after what had happened the previous year, nobody fully trusted that schedule. The hope was there, buzzing under the surface. What appeared instead was not a gift. It was something far weirder. With no warning, in place of the expected rerun, an 11-minute special crashed onto the screen. It was called Bushworld Adventures, and it was unlike anything the show had ever put out. This thing did not come from the usual American team at all. It was made by an Australian internet animator named Michael Cusack, a creator known for rough, crude, very Australian cartoons made for the web. He wrote it, directed it, and produced it himself, bringing his own bizarre style to the characters. The animation was handled by a studio called Studio Yada, the same studio that worked on another Rick and Morty side project involving a famous music group. So this strange special had real talent behind it, but talent pointed in a completely different direction from the normal show. The first joke was hidden in the very setup. The special did not present itself as a fun guest take on Rick and Morty. Instead, it pretended to be a totally separate, long-running show in its own right, supposedly celebrating its 10th season. It introduced its heroes as Rick and Morty, which are warped, twisted Australian versions of Rick and Morty. The framing alone was a clever little jab, acting as if this ugly knockoff were some beloved, established program that had been running for years, rather than a one-time prank that had just dropped out of nowhere. The world it built was Rick and Morty turned inside out and dragged into the Australian outback. Everything fans knew got swapped for a grimy, low-budget version of itself. There was no fancy portal gun for traveling between dimensions. Rick just had a plain, ordinary gun. There was no sleek flying spaceship. The pair drove around in a beat-up old car. There were no wild aliens from distant galaxies. Instead, the dangers were things like fire ants and strange bush wizards. The grand, universe-spanning adventures of the real show were replaced by a long, miserable road trip across the Australian countryside, heading toward a real Australian city called Bendigo in search of a mysterious green cube. The epic was gone. In its place was dust, heat, and a broken-down car. The story that played out was bleak and brutal in a way that caught many viewers off guard. It begins with the Morty character wanting to sleep in, only to have Rick outside yelling at him to get in the car. The boy drags himself along despite not wanting to go. The mother and sister of the family try to stop Rick from taking the kid with him, but they fail completely, unable to keep him from being pulled into the trip. At a gas station along the way, Rick sends the boy into the little shop to grab some snacks and frozen treats. While inside, the boy gets stuck in a long, awkward conversation with the shop worker behind the counter. Rick, growing impatient, simply walks up and shoots the worker dead, killing an innocent person without a flicker of concern, just to end the conversation. Then, back at the car, Rick realizes he has put the completely wrong kind of fuel into it, ruining the vehicle entirely. With the car dead, the two of them are forced to walk on foot for 8 straight days to reach their destination. The look and feel of all this only deepened the discomfort. The animation was rough and ugly on purpose, nothing like the clean, colorful, polished style of the real series. The humor leaned dark and grimy, and the cruelty that the actual show usually wraps in cleverness and science fiction wonder was here stripped down to something raw and meaner. The careless killing, the harsh treatment of the boy, the bleak and hopeless tone of the whole trip, all of it landed harder because it was presented so plainly and so ugly. The real show can be dark, but it usually dresses that darkness up in dazzling adventures across the stars. This special took the darkness and set it in a dusty parking lot next to a broken car, with no wonder to soften it. The reaction from fans was a mix of confusion, laughter, and genuine unease. People who had tuned in hoping for a beautiful new episode, or even just their comfortable old favorite, instead got 11 minutes of a grotesque, foreign nightmare version of the show they love. Some found it brilliantly funny in how committed it was to being awful. Others found it genuinely disturbing, the kind of thing that stuck in the back of the mind and left a strange, uneasy feeling. It crawled under people's skin. The casual death, the hopeless walk, the warped, familiar characters, all of it combined into something that felt like a bad dream about Rick and Morty, rather than the show itself. Underneath the prank, though, the special was doing something genuinely smart. It took every single thing fans treasured about the series and twisted it into a darker, dumber, uglier shape, holding up a funhouse mirror to the show. The fancy gadgets became junk, the space travel became a road trip, the clever cruelty became plain brutality. By pretending to be a long-running beloved show in its 10th season, it gently mocked the way fans obsess over and worship Rick and Morty itself. And by dropping with no warning on the exact day fans had been trained to expect a wonderful surprise, it cleverly turned that very hope against them. The trick fed on the audience's own excitement. The bigger the hope, the harder the strange letdown hit. There is a deeper kind of confidence on display in the whole thing, too. For the people behind Rick and Morty to let an outside creator from another country take their characters and build something this rough, this dark, and this unflattering shows a real comfort with self-mockery. A show that took itself too seriously would never allow a grimy foreign knockoff to air in its place, presenting its heroes as murderous, miserable versions of themselves. By letting Bushworld adventures happen, the series proved it could laugh at itself, poke fun at its own fans, and hand the keys to someone with a wildly different vision, all as one big joke. That willingness to be made ugly is its own form of strength. This is where the special earns its place in a story about forgotten and overlooked media. Even though it is not truly lost, it can still be found. After it aired on television that night, it moved on to the network's own website, where it sat available to watch. By the strict meaning of the word, it never vanished, yet it lives in the same strange in-between space as so many of these pieces. It aired only once on television, with no warning, late on a single night. It is not a real episode, and does not belong to the show's normal collection. It does not appear alongside the regular installments on the usual lists. It is a one-off oddity, a foreign prank that fits nowhere in the proper run of the series. Because of all that, huge numbers of fans simply never saw it. To catch it live, a person had to be watching that exact channel on that exact night and happened to stumble into it instead of the rerun they expected. Anyone who missed that narrow window had no real reason to know it ever existed. And newer fans, the ones who discovered the show later, have almost no chance of bumping into it on their own. It does not show up where they watch the episodes. It is not part of the story the show tells about itself. So it drifts further and further out of memory with each passing year. A bizarre footnote that fewer and fewer people remember. That fading is a quiet shame, because Bushworld Adventures is one of the most fascinating, strange corners of the whole franchise. It is the moment the show let itself be twisted into a nightmare, handed to a foreign creator with a crude and fearless style, and aired as a trick on the very fans who loved it most. It is daring, unsettling, funny, and deeply odd all at once. And like so many of these these pieces, it survives mostly in the memories of the people who happen to catch it, while everyone else walks right past, unaware that this grimy little nightmare is even part of the family. It also marks a particular moment in the show's rise, a point where Rick and Morty was big enough and beloved enough that an entire surprise special could be built around toying with the audience's devotion. Only a show with a truly obsessed fan base could pull a prank like this and have it mean anything. The trick only worked because people cared so deeply. The strange foreign nightmare was, in its own twisted way, a backhanded tribute to just how much the show had come to matter. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Australia gave the two characters this crude, ugly, unsettling twist, a low-budget nightmare from the outback. On the other side of the world, an entirely different country took those same two characters and did almost the exact opposite. Far away, a set of skilled Japanese teams quietly crafted their own beautiful, carefully hand-drawn versions of Rick and Morty, polished and gorgeous instead of rough and grimy. They too arrived with barely any warning, slipping out into the world with almost no fanfare. And just like the nightmare from down under, these lovely creations sailed right past nearly everyone, leaving most fans with no idea they were ever made at all. Section 8, The Beautiful Strangers. The crude nightmare from Australia was one way an outside creator reshaped the two characters. Far across the world, in Japan, a very different kind of transformation took place, and the results were some of the most gorgeous things ever made with Rick and Morty. They were also, for a long time, almost completely unknown to the people who loved the show most. To understand these creations, it helps to know what anime is. Anime is a style of cartoon that comes from Japan. It has its own distinct look, often hand-drawn with great care, full of expressive faces, dramatic action, and a kind of beauty that fans all over the planet adore. It is a whole tradition of animation, deeply respected and instantly recognizable. When people picture anime, they picture that particular Japanese style, with its sweeping movement and striking, detailed art. Over the years, the team behind Rick and Morty let talented Japanese artists take their characters and rebuild them entirely in that style, and what came back was stunning. These pieces did not arrive the way most shows release new content, with big announcements and lots of warning. They slipped out quietly, often appearing with almost no heads up at all. Many of them first showed up during a late-night block on the same network that airs the show, a stretch of programming dedicated to playing anime and action cartoons after dark. Then, soon after, they would land on the show's video channel online, free for anyone to watch. The trouble was that almost nobody knew to look. They came and went so quietly that huge numbers of fans never even learned they existed. The first of these beautiful strangers arrived in the spring of 2020. It was called Samurai and Shogun. A Japanese animation studio named Studio Dean brought it to life, and it premiered with no warning during that late-night anime block before landing online the very next day. What it did with the characters was inspired. It dropped Rick and Morty into old Japan and reimagined them as a wandering swordsman and a small child traveling together. The whole thing was a loving tribute to a famous old Japanese story about a lone warrior who roams the land with his young child at his side. That story is beloved by anime fans the world over, and using it as the template for Rick and Morty was a stroke of brilliance. The reason that choice works so well is worth sitting with. At the heart of Rick and Morty is a simple, powerful pairing, an older figure and a younger one, bound together on a journey. The famous samurai tale is built on the exact same bones, a grown warrior and a small child, moving through a dangerous world side by side. So when the Japanese team mapped Rick and Morty onto that old story, the fit was natural and perfect. The grandfather became the deadly swordsman. The grandson became the child at his side. The core relationship that had carried the show from its earliest homemade days slid effortlessly into a centuries-old Japanese setting, and it felt right. The same dynamic that began in a backyard with a stuck kite now lived in feudal Japan with swords and honor. The look of Samurai and Shogun was a world away from the regular show. The familiar American style, with its simple shapes and bright colors, was replaced by careful, detailed, hand-drawn anime art. The characters looked reborn. Rick, as a samurai, carried a new kind of weight and danger in his every movement. The whole thing had the beauty and drama that anime is famous for. Seeing such well-known characters rendered in that style was a strange and wonderful experience, like meeting old friends wearing completely new clothes. A few months later, in the summer of that same year, a second short arrived in the same quiet way. This one was called Rick and Morty vs. Genocider, and it was directed by a Japanese director named named Takashi Sano. Like the first, it premiered without warning during the late-night anime block, and then went online the next day. This short leaned hard into action, delivering the kind of explosive, fast-moving spectacle that anime does so well. It took the two characters and threw them into a thrilling, beautifully animated adventure, once again proving how well they fit into the Japanese style. The same surprise drop pattern held. Here one moment, gone the next. Available online for anyone who happened to know it was there. The third of these creations came the following year, in the summer, and it was the biggest and most ambitious of the bunch. Called Summer Meets God, with a second part to its name about Rick meeting evil, it ran about 15 minutes and was again directed by Takashi Sano. This one was a tribute to one of the most famous anime ever made, a legendary Japanese cartoon about young people who pilot enormous robots to fight terrifying threats. That giant robot story is one of the most respected and beloved works in all of anime, and Summer Meets God paid loving homage to it. The short tied into the main show as well, continuing the spirit of a Season 5 episode that had itself played around with giant robots and anime style. Its story involved Summer discovering that her new boyfriend was not human, Jerry getting into his usual brand of trouble, and Rick simply being Rick through all of it. Built by a skilled Japanese team, it was lush, dramatic, and gorgeous to look at. Lined up together, these three shorts form a beautiful little collection, and the contrast with the Australian nightmare is striking. Both came from outside the usual American team. Both took the characters and reshaped them through a foreign lens. But where the Australian special was rough, ugly, grimy, and disturbing on purpose, these Japanese creations were polished, elegant, and lovingly detailed. They sit at opposite ends of the same idea. One twisted the show into a low-budget bad dream. The other lifted it into high art. Seeing the same two characters pulled in such wildly different directions shows just how flexible the core of the show really is, how it can survive being made hideous in one corner of the world and made breathtaking in another. These shorts were not ignored by everyone, which is part of what makes their obscurity so strange. The two directed by Sano alone gathered more than 10 million views combined on the show's online channels. That is a massive number, proof that plenty of people did find them and watch them. Millions of pairs of eyes took them in, and yet, despite those huge view counts, they remained off the radar of countless fans. For a piece of media, racking up 10 million views and still being widely unknown is a peculiar fate, and it points to exactly the kind of quiet loss these shorts suffer from. The reason they slip through the cracks comes down to where they live and how they arrive. They were not regular episodes. They did not appear in the show's normal collection or on its official list of episodes. A fan who watches the series the usual way, going through season after season, would never bump into them at all. They existed as standalone videos, dropped with little warning, sitting separately from the main show. So the only people who found them were those who happened to be watching the late night block on the right night, or those who stumbled across the videos online, or those who heard about them from someone in the know. Everyone else, the huge majority of fans, simply went on watching the regular episodes with no idea that an entire beautiful branch of the show was waiting somewhere off to the side. This is the same kind of quiet loss that swallowed the improvised clip and the hidden couch crossover, but with a twist. Those pieces were small and easy to overlook. These anime shorts are substantial, gorgeous, full-length creations with millions of views, and they still manage to be widely unknown. They are not buried by neglect or by secrecy. They are buried by the simple fact that they live outside the main show, in a separate space that most fans never wander into. A person could adore Rick and Morty, watch every single episode many times over, and still have never seen these stunning Japanese versions of the characters they love. The shorts are hiding in plain sight, beautiful and available, yet somehow invisible to most of the very people who would treasure them. There is a real sadness in that, because these creations deserve so much more attention than they get. Skilled artists poured their craft into them. They reimagined beloved characters with care and respect, connecting Rick and Morty to some of the most cherished stories in all of anime. They are some of the most visually impressive things ever made with the franchise. And still, they sit quietly in the shadows, watched by some, missed by most, fading slowly out of the wider conversation about the show. The most remarkable part of this whole story, though, is what these quiet experiments eventually became, and it ties back to the very beginning of everything. These shorts were not the end of the road. They were the seeds of something far bigger. The interest they sparked, the skill they showed, and the way they proved the characters could thrive in the anime style all led somewhere. A few years later, in 2024, the franchise launched a full 10-episode series done entirely in the Japanese anime style. style, with the same director who had made 2 of the shorts now leading the charge. What had started as a handful of overlooked surprise drops grew into an entire proper series, a whole new branch of the Rick and Morty world built in a completely different artistic tradition. That growth echoes the oldest pattern in this entire story. Long ago, a rude little homemade short about a stuck kite quietly grew into one of the biggest cartoons in the world. And here, decades into the journey, the same thing happened again on a smaller scale. A few quiet, easily missed anime shorts grew into a full series of their own. The franchise has this habit, this way of letting small, obscure experiments quietly blossom into much larger things. The big creations keep being born out of the little forgotten ones. The shorts that almost nobody noticed turned out to be the foundation for an entire new way of telling the show's stories. It says something deep about how Rick and Morty operates as a creative force. The show is not content to simply make episodes and stop there. It keeps reaching outward, handing its characters to creators in other countries, in other styles, in other corners of animation, just to see what comes back. Most of those experiments land quietly, seen by some and missed by many. But every so often, one of them grows into something major. The willingness to keep trying these strange side projects, even when most of them stay obscure, is exactly what allows the occasional one to bloom into a whole new series. The forgotten shorts are not failures. They are the testing ground where bigger things are quietly born. For anyone gathering up every overlooked piece of the franchise, these beautiful strangers from Japan are among the most rewarding finds. They carry none of the discomfort of the Australian nightmare, and none of the roughness of the early homemade shorts. They are simply lovely, the work of talented artists treating beloved characters with care and imagination. Discovering them feels like finding a hidden gallery full of gorgeous paintings of old friends, a whole collection of art that was there all along, waiting in a room most people never thought to open. The fact that they remain so unknown, despite their beauty and their millions of views, is one of the quieter shames in the show's long history of forgotten creations. So they hang there still, these elegant Japanese versions of the two travelers, watched by millions, yet known by relatively few, separate from the main show and easy to miss entirely. A wandering samurai and his small companion, a burst of explosive anime action, a loving tribute to giant robots and the threats they fight. 3 beautiful strangers, born quietly, overlooked by most, and powerful enough, in the end, to grow into something far larger than anyone expected. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Beautiful foreign cartoons were one way the 2 characters traveled into places no one expected to find them. They also turned up in corners no cartoon hero would ever normally appear. The pair starred in a slick music video for a famous rap group, gunning their way through an alien world set to a real song. And they popped up in adverts, lending their faces to sell snacks, sprays, and fast food, including one bizarre appearance that aired during the single biggest television night in all of America, watched by a colossal crowd that had no idea what it was about to see. Section 9, Hired Guns. Stunning foreign cartoons sent the 2 characters to feudal Japan and into the world of giant robots. Their travels did not stop at the edges of animation, though. They also wandered into places no cartoon hero usually goes, lending themselves out for hire. They turned up inside the music world, both as a quick skit on a famous rapper's project and as the stars of a full music video for a famous rap group, blasting their way through an alien world set to a real song. And they showed up in commercials, putting their faces to work selling burgers, sprays, snacks, and chips, including one strange appearance during the single biggest television night in all of America. These are some of the most easily forgotten official pieces of the whole franchise, scattered across the internet and buried in old advert breaks. Something about the early part of 2018 pulled the 2 characters straight into the music business, and within a single month, they popped up in the world of rap twice. The first time was small and quick, but it was clever, and it landed in a place most fans of the show would never think to look. A famous American rapper who goes by the name Logic was getting ready to surprise his fans with a new project, the kind of music release that drops out of nowhere. To announce it, he turned to Rick and Morty. What he made with them was a short skit, and the skit did double duty. It first appeared as a little announcement clip to tell fans the new music was coming. Then it became the actual opening of the project itself, a real track that plays first when someone presses play. In the skit, Rick and Morty are sitting in their spaceship, trying to decide what to listen to. Morty wants to put on some of the rapper's music. The 2 of them then get into a back and forth about the 2 different sides of this particular musician. One side of him makes uplifting, thoughtful music, full of positive messages about being whatever a person wants to be, and about equality and hope. The other side of him makes wild, hard-hitting party music, meant to get a crowd hyped up. Rick, being Rick, has no patience for the gentle, inspiring stuff. He is in in the mood to turn things up and go a little crazy, so he demands the loud, rowdy version. And once Rick gets his way, the rest of the music kicks in. The whole thing was voiced, as always, by the show's own performer, doing both characters, which makes it a genuine little piece of Rick and Morty. It is real, it is in character, and it captures Rick's restless, pleasure-seeking attitude perfectly in just a few lines. Yet it lives on a rap project, tucked at the very front of a stranger's music. A fan of the show could listen to that opening skit and instantly recognize the voices and the humor, but only if they happen to be listening to that particular rapper's release in the first place. For everyone else, this tiny official scene simply does not exist in their world. It sits inside someone else's music, easy to miss entirely. Barely a week or two after that skit appeared, the two characters dove far deeper into the music world, and this time the result was a full creation worth treasuring. The show teamed up with a famous American rap duo known as Run the Jewels, a pair of two well-known rappers who performed together. Together they made an animated music video for one of the duo's songs, a track called Oh Mama. A music video, in simple terms, is a short film made to play alongside a song, telling a little story or setting a mood while the music plays. This one was directed by a real director from the show itself, and it was animated by Studio Yada, the very same studio that, just a couple of weeks later, would bring the crude Australian nightmare to life. So in the span of a single month, one studio produced both a grimy Bush Dimension horror and a slick, polished music video, two wildly different sides of the same coin. What makes the Oh Mama video so special is that it is a full, proper Rick and Morty story, packed into about 4 minutes and set to a rap song. This is no quick cameo or simple background appearance. It has a real plot, real action, and real twists, all done in the genuine style of the show. The video opens with Rick and Morty flying over an alien planet in their ship, both of them dressed sharply in matching black suits, looking like a pair of cool secret agents straight out of a famous movie about men who hunt aliens. They storm into an alien nightclub, packed with the bug-like soldiers that serve the show's space government, the same enemy soldiers fans know from the series. The two of them tear through the place, wiping out nearly all the soldiers, sparing only the boss, who is clutching a mysterious suitcase. Rick forces the boss at gunpoint to hand the suitcase over, and then the pair escape using the portal gun, vanishing in an instant. The story keeps building from there. Their ship gets attacked by giant monsters as they try to flee, while the alien boss slips away off the planet. Rick manages to dodge the monsters and fly home safely. Once there, he takes the suitcase down to his basement, where he finds a small alien baby being kept frozen and preserved inside a jar. Rick rapidly grows the little creature all the way to adulthood in moments, then pressures it harshly until it reveals where the space government keeps a certain precious item that Rick is after. Armed with that knowledge, Rick and Morty portal straight into the enemy's headquarters, right into a trap that has been set for them, and they wipe out everyone waiting there. Rick grabs the item he came for and heads back to his room. Then comes the twist, and it is pure Rick and Morty. The Morty who has been at Rick's side through all of this turns out to be a robot. Rick simply switches the robot off, and at that very moment, the real Morty and Summer appear, greeting him. Rick coldly shuts them out, closing the door on them, and opens the suitcase alone, in private, keeping whatever is inside a secret. The whole thing ends on that cold, selfish, secretive note, capturing Rick's character perfectly. The careless violence, the use of a robot double, the lonely obsession with his own goals, all of it is classic Rick. The video had a second job too, beyond just telling a story. The rap duo behind it was set to headline a big festival run by the show's network later that year, a large live event full of music and comedy. So the music video also helped point fans toward that upcoming event, working as both a piece of art and a piece of promotion at the same time. That double purpose is fitting for a section about characters being put to work, since the video was earning its keep in more ways than one. In every way that counts, the Oh Mama video is a tiny, secret episode hiding inside a music video. It has the show's real characters, its real enemies, its real gadgets, and its real dark humor, all crafted by people who actually work on the series. The animation is gorgeous and hand-drawn, the result of careful frame-by-frame work, and the story is genuinely entertaining. A person could watch it and feel like they had just seen a compact, action-packed chapter of the show. And yet, because it lives on the internet as a music video rather than as a proper episode, it falls into the same trap as so many of these pieces. Fans who only watch the regular episodes never come across it. It sits off to the side, separate from the main run, easy to miss completely. A real, beautiful, story-rich piece of Rick and Morty, disguised as something else and quietly overlooked. The music video and the music skit were the artful and clever ends of the for-hire world. The other end was far less glamorous, because because the characters also got rented out to sell products in plain old commercials. There is a rich irony in this, and it is worth pausing on. Rick and Morty, as a show, constantly makes fun of advertising, big corporations, and the whole business of selling people things they do not need. The space government in the show, with its soldiers and its greed, is partly a jab at exactly that kind of soulless corporate machine. So for the show to then turn around and let its own characters star in real adverts, helping companies sell their goods, is a delicious contradiction. The show that mocks selling out went and sold its characters to ad makers. And the show was clever enough to know it, leaning into the joke rather than hiding from it. The earliest of these adverts came in 2017, and they are among the most forgotten pieces in this entire story. In a pair of commercials, Rick comes bursting into Morty's room in the middle of the night, all worked up to rave about a product. In one, he is hyping up a fast food chain's hamburgers. In another, he is going on about a brand of body spray. And in each case, his ranting is followed by an annoying living version of the product itself, an obnoxious talking thing brought to life. These ads are tiny, quick, and barely remembered today. They aired their brief moment, did their job of selling, and then mostly vanished from memory. Most fans have no idea these two commercials ever existed. They are the kind of throwaway, here and gone advert that slips out of the world almost as soon as it arrives. The biggest and most famous of the commercials, though, came in 2020, and it landed on the grandest stage television has to offer. To understand why it mattered so much, the stage itself needs explaining. The Super Bowl is the championship game of American football, and it is the single most watched television event in America every single year. A colossal crowd, tens upon tens of millions of people, gathers to watch it all at once. Because so many eyes are on the screen at the same time, companies pay enormous amounts of money to air their commercials during the game. Super Bowl adverts are famous in their own right, often big, expensive, and packed with stars, treated almost like little events themselves. People watch the game partly just to see the ads. In 2020, Rick and Morty appeared in a Super Bowl commercial for a brand of stackable potato chips, marking the very first time the show had ever shown up during the big game. The advert was put together with the help of a professional advertising company, and the people behind it had a specific goal in mind. They wanted it to feel like a genuine little slice of Rick and Morty that happened to feature the chips, rather than a chip advert that happened to feature Rick and Morty. The aim was for it to play like a real moment from the show, with the product woven into the world, instead of a stiff commercial with cartoon characters pasted on top. The ad was released online a few days before the game, and then aired during the broadcast itself, seen by that massive Super Bowl crowd. For a show that had grown from a rude little homemade short, landing on the most watched night in American television was a remarkable milestone. The commercial itself was a clever, self-aware little bit, exactly the kind of thing the show does best. And it even opened with a trick. It begins with what looks like a normal chip commercial, showing a cheerful animated woman happily biting into a stack of chips with the brand's name on the screen. Then the view pulls back to reveal that this advert is playing on a television, and Rick and Summer are sitting on the couch watching it. So the whole thing starts as an advert inside an advert, a little layer within a layer. Then Morty comes bursting in, weirdly cheerful, gushing about stacking different chip flavors together to make new combinations, rattling off flavor mixes with an unnatural salesman-like excitement. Rick immediately senses that something is wrong, because this bubbly, advert-friendly behavior is completely unlike the real Morty. He tackles the boy and tears off his face, revealing that this Morty is actually a robot built to promote the chips, with the brand's mascot in its eyes. Then Rick makes a horrifying discovery. He and Summer are trapped inside a chip commercial and cannot get out. He rips a strip of wallpaper off the wall to reveal a giant version of the brand's logo hidden underneath. He mutters that he was warned this would happen and did not listen. And then a whole swarm of identical Morty robots floods into the room, filling the screen, with one of them staring directly out at the people watching at home. What makes this advert so smart is that it is a Rick and Morty joke about being trapped in an advert. The show took the very act of selling out and turned it into the punchline. While technically helping to sell a product, the commercial was also poking fun at itself for doing exactly that, treating the whole thing like a nightmare the characters were caught inside. In just 30 seconds, it captured the show's voice perfectly, with its meta humor, its dark twist, its robot doubles, and its sense of unease. The layered opening, the advert hidden inside another advert, only deepened the joke, since the characters were trapped not in one commercial, but in a maze of them. A person who had never seen the show could watch that quick advert and get a real taste of what Rick and Morty is all about. Taken together, the music skit, the music video, and the commercials form a strange little group of for-hire appearances, and they all share the same quiet fate. Each one is a genuine, official piece of Rick and Morty, made with the real characters and often the real creative team. Each one is, by the strict meaning of the word, word, not lost at all, since they can still be found online. And yet each one drifts out of memory for the same reason, because of where it lives. The music skit sits inside a rapper's project. The music video sits among other music videos. The commercials sit among other commercials, or fade away entirely after their brief airings. None of them belong to the show's proper collection of episodes. None of them appear on the normal lists. So fans who watch the series the usual way simply never encounter them, and the wider world forgets they were ever made. The 2017 commercials are the most thoroughly lost of the bunch. They were tiny, quick, and made purely to sell things, so once they had served their purpose, there was no reason for anyone to keep treasuring them. They slipped away almost completely, remembered by only a sliver of dedicated fans. The music skit is nearly as buried, hidden at the front of a rap release where only listeners of that one project would ever stumble onto it. Even the famous Super Bowl advert, watched live by an enormous crowd, fades as a piece of Rick and Morty history, because in people's minds, it gets filed away as a commercial rather than as part of the show. Seen by tens of millions in a single night and still quietly forgotten as a true piece of the franchise. That is a peculiar kind of disappearing, where something can be witnessed by a giant audience and still drift into the shadows. The contrast within this little group is striking too. On one side sits the music video, a beautiful, story-rich, lovingly animated piece that feels like a hidden episode, along with the clever little skit that opened a real rap release. On the other side sit the throwaway adverts, quick and disposable, made to move products off shelves. One reaches for art and wit, the others reach for sales. Yet they all end up in the same forgotten drawer, scattered across the internet, separated from the main show, overlooked by nearly everyone. A fan could know every episode by heart and have no idea that the characters once opened a rap mixtape with a spaceship argument, or starred in a 4-minute rap video, or burst into a bedroom to sell burgers, or got trapped inside a chip commercial during the biggest game of the year. There is something fitting about a show that mocks corporate greed, ending up scattered across music projects and adverts, with most of those pieces quietly forgotten. The show spent years making fun of the way companies sell and discard things, and then its own for-hire creations got sold, aired, and discarded in much the same way. The music video and the commercials became exactly the kind of disposable corporate content the show loves to satirize, used for a moment and then left behind. The irony loops back on itself perfectly. The cartoon that laughs at advertising became advertising, and then got treated the way advertising always gets treated, used up and forgotten. For anyone hunting down every overlooked corner of the franchise, these hired-out appearances are a rewarding and slightly funny set of finds. The music video is a genuine treasure, a real story worth watching that almost no one thinks to seek out. The skit is a clever little surprise, proof that the characters once kicked off a rapper's release with their own voices. And the commercials are odd little curiosities, especially the nearly vanished early ones, proof that the characters once moonlighted as salesmen in the middle of the night. Together, they show a show willing to send its heroes anywhere, into a rap song, into a mixtape intro, into a burger ad, into the biggest game in the country, and then let those creations quietly slip out of memory once their moment had passed. So they linger out there, these hired guns, two characters arguing over music in their spaceship at the start of a stranger's mixtape. Two characters in sharp black suits, tearing through an alien club to a rap beat. A grandfather barging in at midnight to rave about fast food and body spray. A family trapped inside a chip commercial as robot copies swarm the screen before a colossal crowd. Real, official, and made with care, yet scattered to the far corners of the internet and the forgotten ends of old advert breaks, remembered by almost no one as the genuine pieces of the show that they truly are. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Every piece covered so far has been something made and then misplaced, hidden away, or simply forgotten by the crowd. The final loss is a different kind entirely, and it is the heaviest of them all. It is the loss of a voice. After 6 full seasons, the single person who had spoken for both of the main characters since the very beginning was suddenly gone, and the show was forced to carry on without the one voice that had been there since the days of a stuck kite in a backyard. Section 10. The Voice That Vanished. Every lost piece gathered so far has been a thing that was made and then misplaced. A homemade short left to gather dust. Hours of recordings sealed away. A crumbling game. A hidden crossover. A foreign nightmare. Beautiful strangers. Hired out adverts. All of them are objects. Creations that drifted into the shadows. The final loss is not an object at all. It is a sound. It is the loss of the single voice that gave life to the two main characters from the very first moment. And it is the heaviest loss in this entire story. That voice belonged to Justin Roiland. He was one of the two people who created Rick and Morty, and from the beginning, he did something rare and remarkable. He voiced both of the main characters himself. The loud, burping grandfather and the nervous, stammering grandson came out of the same throat, the same person flipping back and forth between the two. And this did not start with the famous show. It reaches all the way back to where this whole story began. The rude little backyard short from 2006, the one about a stuck kite, featured that same voice doing those same two characters in their earliest form. The follow-up shorts carried it. The couch crossover carried it. The hidden hours of improv were built around it. For more than 15 years, stretching from a homemade joke to a worldwide hit, that one voice was the sound of Rick and Morty. In a very real way, the voice was the show. For 6 full seasons, that voice did the job week after week. It became one of the most recognizable sounds in modern cartoons. People quoted it, imitated it, and loved it. The burps, the rambling rants, the panicked whining of the boy, all of it came from one performer who had been doing these characters since long before anyone was paying attention. The voice had grown up alongside the show, carried it from obscurity to fame, and seemed like it would simply always be there. Then, very suddenly, it was gone. In January of 2023, Roiland was removed from the show. The reason was serious. He had been charged with a crime involving harm to someone close to him, a charge of domestic abuse. When the news broke, the people behind the show acted quickly and dismissed him. The same person who had created the characters and voiced them for their entire existence was cut from the series, and the decision was final. The situation around him was complicated and difficult. Sometime after he was let go, the original charge against him was dropped, with officials saying there was not enough evidence to move forward. Later still, a news organization reported further serious allegations of misconduct against him. Through his lawyer, Roiland denied those allegations. The full truth of all of it became a tangled, heavy matter, the kind of thing that stirred strong feelings and left a lot of people unsure what to think. What was clear and certain, regardless of all the back and forth, was that his time with the show was over. The voice was not coming back. The fallout reached beyond Rick and Morty alone. Roiland had lent his voice and creative hand to other projects as well, and he was removed from those too. Other shows he had been part of replaced him or cut him out entirely. On Rick and Morty itself, his role was quietly shrunk. Where the opening of the show had always proudly named both creators, that credit changed, with his name no longer announced in the way it once had been. The series began trying to move forward, as if a giant piece of its own history had been carefully folded away. That left the show with an enormous problem, one that few series have ever faced in quite this way. Most shows that lose an actor only have to replace one character. Rick and Morty had to replace one person who had been voicing two of the most important characters at once. Two voices that talked to each other constantly, often in the same scene, sometimes in the same breath. Both of those voices had lived inside a single performer. Finding a way to carry on meant finding new people who could step into not one, but two of the most beloved and recognizable voices in all of animation and make them sound right. So the team launched a long and careful search. It stretched on for around half a year, a wide hunt that reached far and wide. By the accounts of the people running it, they listened to thousands of voices, sorting through countless hopefuls in search of the rare few who could pull off the impossible. They were not just looking for someone who could do a rough impression. They needed performers who could match the original voices closely and, crucially, keep them steady and consistent across entire seasons, episode after episode, without slipping. That is a brutally hard thing to ask. The slightest wobble would be noticed by millions of devoted fans who knew the original sound by heart. In the end, they chose two new performers. One man, named Ian Cardoni, took over the voice of the grandfather. Another, named Harry Belden, took over the voice of the grandson. A third new actor, John Allen, stepped in to voice another beloved character that Roiland had also performed. These new voices were picked because they were sound-alikes, people who could copy the original voices so closely that the difference would be hard to catch. The goal was clear: keep the characters sounding as much like themselves as possible so the show could continue without the loss tearing a hole right through the middle of it. The way the change was handled added a strange layer to the whole thing. The show kept the identities of the new voice actors a secret right up until the moment the new season arrived. Fans knew a change was coming, but they did not know who was behind the new voices until the season actually premiered in the autumn of 2023. And when those new episodes finally played, something quietly astonishing happened. The replacements were so close to the originals that many fans watched without even noticing the difference. People who did not know about the change behind the scenes could sit through entire episodes and never realize that the voices had been performed by completely different people. The imitation was that good. The seam was nearly invisible. This is where the loss reveals its true new and unusual shape, and why it belongs as the final and heaviest piece in this story. The original voice is now retired from the show forever. The person who first dreamed up these characters and breathed life into them in a backyard short and across 6 seasons will never voice them again. The characters live on. The show continues. The sound continues too, carried now by skilled imitators. But the original performance, the genuine article that started it all, has ended. A chapter that ran for more than 15 years closed, and it will never reopen. The new voices are good, even remarkable in how closely they match. Yet they are copies, careful and faithful copies, of something that came first. The original is preserved, but it is frozen. It will never grow, never add a new line, never burp out a fresh joke as part of a new episode. Everything the original voice ever did for the show is now a finished, sealed collection. No more will ever be added to it. The well that fed the show for so long has been capped. And here is where this final loss reaches back and quietly touches everything that came before it in this story. Think of all the pieces already covered. The rude little 2006 short and its forgotten follow-ups. The hidden hours of improvised recordings. The brutal couch crossover hiding inside another show. The slick rap music video. The midnight commercials and the chip advert before a giant crowd. Nearly all of those American creations carry the original voice. They are not only obscure and overlooked now, they have quietly become something more. They are among the last homes of a voice that no longer continues on the show. The original sound of Rick and Morty lives on inside those older pieces, scattered and forgotten as so many of them are, and it lives on nowhere new. Each of those lost and hidden treasures is now also a small vault, holding a recording of a voice that the series itself has moved past. That gives the whole collection of forgotten pieces a deeper weight. They were already worth seeking out for being rare and overlooked. Now they carry an extra meaning. To watch the old backyard short, or the hidden couch gag, or the rap video, is to hear the genuine original voice doing the characters it created, in a form the show will never produce again. Those scattered relics have become a kind of museum, preserving the true beginning and the true sound of the series, even as the show marches onward with its careful imitations. There is something quietly haunting about how smoothly the loss was managed. The show did everything it could to make the change invisible. It searched for half a year to find perfect sound-alikes. It kept their names secret until the last moment. It made sure the new voices matched so closely that most people would barely feel the difference. In doing so, the series tried to carry on as though almost nothing had happened, as though the foundational voice had not been removed at all. And to a large degree, it succeeded. The show kept going, the characters kept talking, most viewers kept watching, many of them never even sensing that the original was gone. That smoothness is its own strange kind of loss. The biggest, most important departure in the show's history was made to feel nearly seamless, almost unnoticed. A normal loss is loud. A beloved actor leaves, the character sounds different, everyone feels the gap, and the show grieves openly. This loss was the opposite. It was hushed, hidden, smoothed over, designed to slip past without a ripple. The original voice did not get a grand farewell. It simply stopped quietly, behind the scenes, replaced by an echo so accurate that the silence where it used to be is hard to even hear. The loss is real and enormous, and at the same time, it is one of the most invisible things in the entire story. For the people who do know, though, the weight is impossible to ignore. They cannot watch a new episode without a part of their mind whispering that the voice they are hearing is a stand-in, a faithful copy of something that has ended. They cannot revisit the old backyard short without realizing they are listening to the true original at the very start of its long life, a voice that has now finished its run. The whole history of the show gets quietly recolored by this knowledge. The beginning and the ending of that original voice become bookends around everything in between. This final piece is different from all the others in one more important way. The other losses can, in theory, be undone. A forgotten short can be dug up and shared. A hidden recording could one day be released. A crumbling game could perhaps be rebuilt. An obscure music video can be found and watched again. But a voice that has been retired cannot come back. The performer is gone from the show, and no amount of searching the internet will ever produce new original lines. This loss is permanent in a way the others are not. The hidden things can be recovered. The vanished voice cannot. So the sound that started in a backyard, doing a rude joke about a stuck kite, the sound that grew up alongside the show and carried it from a homemade short to a worldwide phenomenon, came to a quiet and sudden stop after 6 seasons. It was replaced so carefully and so skillfully that the world barely felt the change. The characters speak on, in voices built to mirror the original as closely as possible, and the genuine first voice lives only in what already exists, preserved across the regular episodes and tucked inside every one of the forgotten pieces gathered in this long journey, never to speak a new word for the show again. All 10 of these pieces, set side by side, begin to form a single shape. The forgotten origin shorts, the buried recordings, the slipped away clip, the crumbling game, the hidden crossover, the foreign nightmare, the beautiful strangers, the hired out appearances, and the vanished voice. Apart, each one is just a curious scrap, a small thing lost in its own small way. Gathered together, though, they start to point at something larger. A single quiet truth about this show and the strange, scattered trail of forgotten things it has left behind across all its years. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.